Of course, I can't proceed without thanking our partners, in particular our colleagues from the EU, and also our collaborators and our mother body, if there's ever such a thing, the EU, for being present with us, and of course our colleagues from Malawi. I was whispering to the colleagues that I don't know now what I'm supposed to say. That's always the gift of being put towards the tail end of the welcoming remarks, because you look at your remarks and almost everything that you wanted to mention has been there. So I will take those points and I'll put them aside with perhaps an intention of looking at the broader narrative in relation to what we are discussing here today. There are 4 points that I want to make, or I will speak around, namely to make the argument that sometimes I think we are not conscious of the gravity of some of the discussions that we're having in relation to the development of our continent. Because we have them so often, they become somewhat monotonous, because we get into these platforms and we speak about STI, we're speaking about emerging technologies without really understanding and appreciating the broader frame in relation to the topics that we're discussing. And I think this is perhaps one of those subjects that requires far more attention than what we are giving to it. From a continental perspective at Outer Nepal, you would understand, based on our mandate, almost all of our work revolves around creating prosperity for the continent, with the aim of moving Africa to the next quantum in terms of development. And the main thesis that I would really want to move around this morning is to say that there is a relationship between prosperity, competitiveness, productivity, and technology. And if we are going to address fundamentally the questions that confront Africa from a prosperity point of view, we have to speak about Africa's competitiveness from a global point of view and from a global perspective. And if we're speaking about Africa's competitiveness, we have to speak about Africa's productivity from a continental point of view, but also from an individual member state perspective, in terms of how are we performing in relation to questions of productivity and how technology feeds into that particular narrative in terms of enhancing our productivity levels across the continent. And this is a discussion that is not only limited to the African continent, it's a global discussion. If you look across the world, almost every single region from a continental point of view or from a regional point of view is asking itself questions that are linked to the question of competitiveness. And I think we have to consider that in everything that we do, we are framing it in a context where fundamentally we're speaking about cooperation at a global level, but there's also great competition amongst nations and regions and economic powers in terms of achieving the prosperity that we want. So what is the rest of the world saying in relation to this? Our friends from the EU have recently undergone a very robust and rigorous assessment in relation to their own competitiveness. And there are a number of issues that have emerged out of that, which I think should be learnings and critical learnings for us as a continent as we think about where we are going in relation to our own productivity and the role that technology can play in enhancing that particular productivity. And I'm going to focus on this, which is the EU competitiveness report, often referred to as the Draghi report. And I want to lift up perhaps 3 elements that Europe is saying about itself in relation to these critical questions of our contemporary discourse. And those revolve around 3 issues. One, I want to speak briefly around questions surrounding labor productivity in the EU. I want to speak about questions relating to competitiveness in the EU, and also, lastly, technology and innovation. And I think there's great learnings for us to pick up in relation to that. Firstly, from a labor productivity point of view, the EU's labor productivity growth has averaged 0.5% per year since 2019, trailing significantly behind the US, which grew at 1.6% per year over the same period. This lag has contributed to a widening real GDP per capita gap, which grew from 17% in 2002 to 30% in 2023, reflecting the EU's decreasing share of global economic influence. The EU's low productivity growth stems from weak performance in high-value industries like digital services and advanced manufacturing, which contribute significantly to productivity gains in the US. For example, in sectors like technology and communications, the US workforce output per hour is nearly 40% higher than the EU average. And one of the key challenges that the EU faces is the rigidity in terms of labor markets, where the EU faces challenges such as inflexible employment laws and slower reallocation of labor from low to high productivity sectors. Secondly, in relation to competitiveness, the Draghi report cites that the EU's share of global exports declined from roughly 16.5% in 2005 to 14.1% in 2022. Private sector investments, EU companies collectively invest 700 billion euros less annually in innovation compared to US firms, and the EU attracts lower levels of FDI in innovation-intensive sectors than the US. For instance, in 2022, the US attracted 35% of global FDI flows compared to the EU's 21%. The EU lags in high-growth entrepreneurship with 2.5 startups per 100,000 people compared to 5.6 in the US, primarily due to less access to venture capital and risk-averse regulatory environments. On technology and innovation, the US invests 3.4% of GDP in research and development compared to the EU's 2.2%, and this gap amounts to a funding shortfall of nearly 100 billion euros annually for the EU. The EU has only a 10% global share of technology patents, while the US accounts for over 35%, highlighting its dominance in innovation. On artificial intelligence, the US developed 70% of global foundational AI modules since 2017, whereas the EU accounts for only 7%, underscoring its limited presence in this critical area of AI. AI adoption in the EU remains at 15% of businesses compared to 45% in the